right. Mysterio 1870, Hail Mare Nightscape. Coming to you live from wherever the hell I am. And I want to try something different today, if possible. Looks like I'm streaming correctly. I see little knobs and whatnot lighting up. Hey, Death Leopards. How's it going? Good evening. Glad to see you as always. I made some progress here. I'll show off a little bit of the bass, but I want to try to see if I can, I'm already multitasking. I want to see if I can add another layer of complexity. Yeah, thank you. I'm very proud of my little bridge. It's a little too straight. I should probably adjust this path some to make it look less robotic, but I wanted to be able to get over to that other side over there. And I like to mix in some of these different textures. But I also want to, I've been circling back around to these texts by Lenin over and over, since that's what I've been reading recently. And so I wanted to see if it's possible to read some of that, so that will distract me from Minecraft a little bit, which is probably fine. As long as I don't die to a creeper explosion, I'm okay with it. I'm not doing anything dangerous. I was just going to clear out some of this stuff. And then, while I play, I can respond a little bit to some of the quotes, because I feel like, I was just trying to think, I had kind of two problems I wanted to solve. I think this is one way to solve both of them. One is, generating content, so to speak. Right? It's a little, I don't want to just repeat myself over and over and say, foolish things and things that become trite and shop-worn. And so I read, something most days, every day, and certainly every week I'm reading something, and sometimes it's news or, current event type stuff, although I feel somewhat behind on some important things, especially international things. But I also am, constantly reading theory, trying to link the two together, and then I have, like I said, I just started classes, so I have stuff that I read for school assignments as well, that this semester will be biology, ecology and evolution, and as well as several relatively straightforward philosophy classes. And then the bulk of my time right now is spent preparing for the MCAT, which is sort of a chore. And so that's a lot on my plate, and I'm not producing, I'm not making a lot of money, I'm not making any money at the moment, and I'm not producing a lot of output. So this little Minecraft hobby allows me to cash out the little bit of reading that I do. So that's one of the problems. And then the other problem is, like my insights, such as they are probably not all that amazing. Whereas I think it is possible to, maybe sometimes they're good, but most of the time they're probably stuff you could figure out on your own. But sharing some of the words, written by these folks that I have learned a lot from seems like it's something valuable and can be a benefit to this little channel. When I catalog these videos, people can go back and see, oh, well, he's talking about State and Revolution with actual quotes rather than just kind of how he remembered it. And I think that's particularly important for people who, whom I'm targeting with this channel, who I hope this appeals to, who may be interested in socialism in a broad way, or interested in politics, or maybe you're just interested in watching somebody kind of stumble their way through Minecraft, but who don't have a deep familiarity with the text. A lot of people don't have time, they're students or they're workers or both, and they're taking care of family, etc. So they don't have a lot of time to read some of this literature that I've been lucky enough to have, leisure time to get to immerse myself in. So that's my thinking. So, of course, when I was reading State and Revolution here, I've read it several times. I think it's a good text. We've talked about it before on this channel in the way I just mentioned. But when I was reading it recently, I took, some pretty extensive notes, or not even notes. That's probably going too far. I took I took some notes, but I primarily pulled out quotations that I thought were valuable and worth hanging on to, so I could come back and write up some stuff on it later. And I suppose I must admit that, there were a few things that were particularly important that would make me pull a tweet out, sorry. Lyndon was not tweeting. Make me pull a quote out, although I did tweet some of them. And I did the same thing with Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism as well, which I really like. And those are sort of Well, if it was something really well written or really funny, then I pulled it out. Or if it was something that I thought was particularly prescient, and I know we've talked about this before, Death Leopards, that you read, certain texts, but Lennon is, his texts are among the most notable examples of this, where it just feels very much like this could have been written, a year ago or a week ago, and even though different figures are named in the text that we're reading, if you just substitute in our democratic socialists for their social democrats, then the rest of the argument holds in a really shocking, like time traveling kind of way. So that's my thinking. The problem obviously will be the multitasking. So it may be, I don't know. I'll watch the video later to see how boring it is. Just to sort of stare. I'm hoping that it's more interesting to have Lennon's words, and that makes up for if I have to kind of put my axe down for a moment on the Minecraft house. But before I jump into some of these quotations, I do want to just. This is going to take me not long to clear out, and then I could come up with something I want to build over here and clear out that stuff over there too. I just wanted to run over to the McMansion there and show off the little bit of decorating I've done. I haven't done a lot, so here's my new bridge. Digging down at Y -59 has given me access to all of this like Grimstone, this deep slate. And obviously I still had plenty of oaks. I'm using oak for most of the build here. And I tried to mix it up with a little bit of different texture. So I still have the cobbled, I like these bricks, they look amazing. And then I have some cracked, there's some cracked ones too that I threw in the furnace for a little while. Like I said, this path is too narrow, but I like this trick I saw somewhere. It looks really good with shaders, or if you put some stairs in, you can drop in a few buckets of water. And I mix in some trap doors, some oak logs. It looks kind of cool from underneath, I think. I like this sort of multi-layered. See, it looks a little bit insane, like an old, weird, worn bridge. So I could make that all the same level if I came back and added in some slabs, but I like the way it looks now. And then you see I haven't finished, but I started adding in some mossy cobble. I added in some flowers around here. You see the mossy cobblestone just as much. I have a great vine farm here, so I could put in a lot more mossy cobblestone. And I finished off the roof, but I think that was in the previous episode. And then I'll just show inside real quick. I moved the lightning rod up there at the top too. That was really annoying. I did some decorating in here too, as you can see. So I did the enchanting setup previously, but then I just added some foliage, a little, seating area. I rearranged some of the storage facilities over here, added this carpet. I have a planter, added a grindstone for my enchanting setup. And so this is not done, but this is pretty good. There's a little flower pot. I'm fine with this for right now. And then up here, I should mention this. So I got a silk touch. I didn't know I was going to get. Oh yeah, thank you. It feels pretty cozy. I didn't know this was going to be silk touch, or I would have put on one of my diamond pickaxes. It just said Unbreaking 3, which is all I've gotten over and over. So I do have a silk touch now. So I got a lot of ore, but I found. Look at it's insane. Look at all this. These diamonds are all from one vein. I found a 19. There's only 18 here. One of them's over there. I found a 19 diamond rich vein, which is insane. I've never seen anything like that. The most I thought you could get was like 8, and that would be real lucky in the 1.17 in previous versions. But 19 is just fucking totally bonkers. And of course, it was off stream, so it's not recorded. But that's all from one vein. I've only found 3 veins in total, and I'm using one of the veins, and then one is right there, and the other is that 19 payload. So I'll finish up this storage area, and I did a little bit of decorating. I might put a fish tank up here. I've been thinking about that. But let's go up here and take a look around while we invite Lennon into the conversation for a minute. Hey, shut, Birch. I could probably turn the render distance up some, but I'm kind of digging this view. I'm glad I gave myself the access up here. This is all going to be filled in with buildings sooner rather than later. And I definitely want to find a village. That's very high on my priority list. I want to get fortune and find a village. But let's take a quick look. Let's see if I'm I think I can. I'm not sure I can scroll though. Let's see if I have a way to do it. No, see, it just freezes the game for me. All right, not a big deal. So some of the stuff that I have from Lenin here, let me just throw a few of these quotes out. So this is Lenin writing. The petty bourgeois Democrats, those sham socialists who replaced the class struggle by dreams of class harmony, even picture the socialist transformation in a dreamy fashion, not as the overthrow of the rule of the exploiting class, but as the peaceful submission of the minority to the majority, which has become aware of its aims. This petty bourgeois utopia, which is inseparable from the idea of the state being above classes, led in practice to the betrayal of the interest of the working class, as was shown, for example, by the history of the French revolutions of 1848 and 1871, and by the experience of, quote, socialist participation in bourgeois cabinets in Britain, France, Italy, and other countries at the turn of the century. And, my little note here is that Lenin here is using his time-traveling powers to critique Bernie Sanders. It should be maybe clear why some of that resonates. A couple of things I think that are worth drawing out of that particular quotation, and also, which come up several times throughout the text, are these two competing theories of the state. And we talked a little bit on a previous episode, Burn Zombies. We talked a little bit on a previous, stream, I guess I should say, about the sort of social contract theory of the state. And, Lenin he's not addressing social contract theory directly, but there is a way in which this bourgeois conception of the state is exactly the same as the social contract theory, or at least one of its formulations. And so, what is it that Lenin has got beef with here, and what is he proposing as a better understanding of the state? Well, I think it's something that we see entirely too often now among, so-called progressive or liberal left politicians, or even, if I can use so-called again, right, so-called socialist, democratic socialist. It is the chief error, or at least among the very chief errors of the democratic socialists of America and that flavor of socialism, in my opinion, although I don't mean to throw every member of the DSA under the bus. I know a lot of people organize with the DSA out of the best intentions and may, in some cases, move in a more radical direction as a result of their time with that organization, and may try to push it in a communist direction. I've never joined, so I can't speak to what the day-to-day inside that organization is like. I just think there are potential comrades there that I'm not trying to shit on, even though I think there's serious problems with the organization itself. One of those serious problems is exactly what Lenin is pointing to in that passage and in similar passages surrounding it in State and Revolution. It's the idea that the state is something that reconciles classes, something that stands outside of classes as an arbiter, as a neutral adjudicator of interests that can be brought together in harmony. Right? This is even a socialist who recognizes the let's just say potential conflicts between classes, right? A Marxist would probably point to the almost always necessary conflicts between opposed classes. But if you look at workers and owners, right, just for your basic sort of simplistic division here, the idea that Lenin is attacking is the reformist, essentially anti-Marxist idea that that neither of those two groups expresses its power through the state exclusively or in a dominating fashion, and that rather the state is, as it purports to be to some degree, something detached from and wholly external to civil society, right? If that's what we want to call it, the area, the public sphere that is not essentially political, the market, right, or society. Society is, according to the Marxist conception, that Lenin is highlighting here, and in contrast to the other view, society is composed of warring classes. And again, which classes we should talk about with when we're speaking in a Marxist vein is a question that has been litigated many times, and you find, for example, a much more detailed or variegated. You find much more different. You find many more different classes in some of Marx's texts than you do in others. For example, in the political text that I mentioned before, the 18th Brumaire, um, you find analysis of peasant class and petty bourgeoisie, the lumpen proletariat, etc. Whereas in the Communist Manifesto, there's a much more of a focus just on the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And so I'm not saying that fairly simplistic analysis is something that should just be universally applied in all places, all times. I'm just using it to kind of get the point out here. And so with that caveat, the bourgeoisie, um, the state is essentially an expression of the rule of the bourgeoisie, according to Marxist theory, right? And we'll get to another quote here from Lenin in a minute if I quit running my mouth for a second, where he makes it very clear that at least on his reading of the Marxist understanding of the state, it is a machine that oppresses one class in the name of the other. So you see how there are. I hope I haven't talked too much to get away from the very simple point here, which is reconciling classes is not the job of the state as much as reformist socialists and certainly liberals would have you believe. Where do you see, and rather the job of the state is to oppress one class in order to serve another. And so, where do we, just before I turn back to Lenin again, where do we see this? I think you see it all throughout the sort of Bernie Sanders rhetoric, that instead, his the way he thinks about billionaires, for example, is as some entity that can be rendered, if not harmless, at least the harm can be mitigated via legal and administrative processes. So someone who believes that the state serves the billionaire class, right, or the ownership class whose pinnacle is the billionaire, someone who thinks that the state is an expression of their dominance, would find it impossible, therefore, to say, oh, well, we're going to use this mechanism, right, this machine that they are, murdering us and holding us down with. That's the thing that we'll use to stop them. This is a obvious logical contradiction, and this contradiction undercuts pretty much every view that the progressive or democratic socialist wing of mainstream U.S. electoral politics embraces. And I think we could give countless examples of this. And remember, this is a separate point than the point about social chauvinism that we were discussing the other day, which will also come back in this text. This is a related but separate critique of the same groups, the same social democrats. If you look, just for a second, obvious example, if you look at the strategy of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, it is not a revolutionary strategy in the sense in which I think Marxists would use that term. Rather, it claims, if it even claims to be revolutionary, it purports to aim to accomplish that revolution through the mechanisms of the bourgeois state. And you run into, elections, most notably, and you run into precisely the same problem that we were just outlining with the Sanders case, which is a belief that the ruling class would give to those that it rules an instrument which is capable of being used against the ruling class, right? Here, ruling class says, take this, it will constrain me. Now, if your ruler hands you a tool that they tell you will hold them in check, I think it's quite, leaving Lenin and Marx's arguments aside, I think you should be suspicious of that just as a person who's not a fool. Now, capitalism does produce its own gravediggers. This is a separate point, and we could come back to that. And it's also, the point I'm making does not mean, I think, that, and I think Lenin and Engels and Marx all agreed with what I'm about to say, this does not mean that Marxists, even revolutionary socialists, should abandon electoralism in all its forms, always, under all conditions, right? Like that's a categorical, idealist, I guess, sort of ahistorical approach that is anathema to Marxism, is bad, it's external, it's alien to Marxism. In our current conditions, and also, like I said, what gives you the time traveling vibes from Lenin in his conditions, and the conditions in Europe, and especially in Germany at the time, even though he's Russian, obviously, he's in conversation with the German Social Democrats about many of these points. In both of these circumstances, especially in our own time, I think there's a strong argument that electoralism, in its bourgeois instantiation, right, but imperialist electoralism is essentially a dead end from the point of view of accomplishing, the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is a phrase we can come back to. Whether that's always true in every circumstance, I mean, it may be at the point now where that's not a wild claim to make at all. But obviously the DSA disagrees with that. With what I've just said, they think it's not only possible, certainly possible in the abstract, but also possible right now in the heart of empire, in some of the least favorable conditions that I could possibly imagine for establishing socialism. So I just think that's a very problematic and misleading claim to make. So hopefully that is a reasonable outline of some of the potential difficulties that are posed, even for our situation, by a little bit of wrestling with this text. So let me throw another quote at you as I catch some Minecraft Z's. This is Lenin, the overthrow of bourgeois rule can be accomplished only by the proletariat, the particular class whose economic conditions of existence prepare it for this task, and provide it with the possibility and the power to perform it. While the bourgeoisie break up and disintegrate the peasantry and all the petty bourgeois groups, they weld together, unite, and organize the proletariat. Only the proletariat, by virtue of the economic role it plays in large-scale production, is capable of being the leader of all the working and exploited people, whom the bourgeoisie exploit, oppress, and crush. And yes, I heard that spider. Where is it? There. Whom the bourgeois, the proletariat is capable of being the leader of the working and exploited people, whom the bourgeoisie exploit, oppress, and crush, often not less but more than they do the proletarians, but who are incapable of waging an independent struggle for their emancipation. Worth considering here, I've added, in response to this, and we touched on this point I'm about to make last time, so forgive me if I'm being redundant, but I think it's a point worth considering. So worth considering here, in my opinion, is how these conditions of production have changed, or in certain segments are essentially absent in the contemporary U.S., right? We talked a little bit about how the sort of digitization and dematerialization of work in the United States at this particular moment may provide certain constraints, or at least change the terms under which we can claim to even have a revolutionary proletariat in the United States. We want to, I think, as Marxists, as dialectical materialists, which I said that is a frame of reference that I do embrace for political analysis, even though I think we could find, I guess I should say, historical materialism when I'm doing politics specifically. But all the same, this is an approach that I find extremely eye-opening, and despite some philosophical critiques that allow us to, I think, improve upon this position without rejecting it, right? To transcend it, to off-haven it, or off-haven, pardon. I think it's worth thinking about the way that the conditions that would give rise to a revolutionary class in the United States are or are not present. And previously I highlighted some of the ways that factory production brings workers in close contact with one another and allows them to have shared interest and, in a Hegelian way, a sense of power in their own ability to objectify their labor. Right? You work on something and you see it produce something in the world. And now this process is alienating in the way that the young Marx described, in that you only have one small portion of the process and don't reap any of the benefits and are dehumanized in the process and cut off from your fellow man and don't get to plan rationally in this production, right? Those four different types of estrangement or alienation, which we could talk about later. But nevertheless, factory production and the industrial and modern setting of the proletariat at the time Marx was writing, and in a different way, but still, were very much held for the time in which Lenin was writing. Like in Germany, it definitely held. I put it that way. Now you're dealing with a different class structure and different modes of production in Tsarist, agrarian, barely post serfdom Russia, obviously. And so we would get into a big discussion that maybe is beyond the scope of this point I want to make, about the fact that Marx always sort of foresaw, or generally foresaw, industrialized, liberal, bourgeois democracies, Western democracies in Europe as the most likely places for socialism to take root. And of course, there were socialist leaning revolutions, and there's an example of the Paris Commune in France. I mean, France was definitely what Marx had his eye on, and in a different sort of way, England and Germany. But then, where do you actually see the successes? I'm making a well-known point here. Russia, right? That's a backwards country from by European standards, and China, where you have a revolutionary peasantry, and Cuba, and Africa, where you have colonial systems of oppression to overcome. So I digress, but all of those conditions, all of those social conditions reflect underlying, differences in the modes of production among those different historical and political contexts. And, it's hard to get a firm grasp on the production of value and the production of commodities and what it means to be a worker and what it means to be a part of the proletariat here in the United States. Right? And you also have, just to add a little bit more here, you have Fanon emphasizing the potential revolutionary role of the lumpen proletariat, which Marx saw, lumpen proletariat, sort of the unemployed riffraff of the cities, the potentially criminal class, the gamblers and whatnot. He saw them as more likely to be police informants, or at least like just sort of without class interest and easily exploitable by whatever powers happen to offer them a good deal. And under the influence of Frantz Fanon, who's an Algerian French psychoanalyst and political theorist and revolutionary, the Black Panthers in the U.S. also reclaimed the lumpen proletariat as a potential revolutionary subject, if I can speak that way, right? The doer of the revolution, the revolutionary subject. And so, well, those modifications of Marx's theories were at least ostensibly and perhaps correctly, it's a separate conversation whether they're correct or not, but those are modifications based on applying historical materialism to the facts on the ground, so to speak. And history has demonstrated, at least in the case of former colonial possessions, that there is revolutionary potential outside of the industrial city centers. I think, maybe others would disagree with that, but it seems like they got a pretty hard case when you look at China and when you look at Africa and so on. So all of that just to say, how does the gig economy affect the subject of revolution in the United States, right? How does the digital economy, how do the sort of disciplinary and surveillance apparatuses that are omnipresent, how does this affect our ability as workers? How do 401ks, or even salaried employees have, at least on paper, some ownership of the company? How does all of this affect our analysis of what constitutes a class and which classes we can expect? And it's fucking lunacy usually to predict the future, in my opinion. But which ones we could expect probabilistically to be revolutionary? Are there any? Or is this, is it up to the developing world? Is it up to China as a counterpower to the U.S.? Is it up to some forces that we haven't yet really seen emerge on the radar to do the work that we here in the U.S. and in Europe are simply unable to do? Those are some things if you have thoughts on that, anyone listening, please let me know. I think that those are difficult questions for me. And I sure would like to do more thinking about it, but it requires a lot of detailed economic and historical analysis. So let's continue. I think we got time for at least one more quote. And, Death Leopards, please let me know if you think this is a useful or a foolish strategy or if you want more data. Right? We could always try this again or try a few other formats, but I'm just trying to figure out what will work best for, this little hobby I have. I'm a reader, and I usually value good readers. Like, are you able to manage a text and produce a compelling interpretation? And my best learning experiences have always come from self-organized small reading groups where we do damn near line by line close readings of difficult texts. That's how I learned to lose, for example. And I'll plug again, we're starting up a capital reading group that I hope will proceed somewhat along those lines. I was part of a Lacan reading group. I've read Adorno and Horkheimer and Maimon. Oh, hey, so nice to see you. I frickin' lied. Our first time chat. Yeah, I have, of course, I'll post this video on YouTube, so if you want to go back and watch all the exciting run-up to this, feel free. But yeah, I'm going to probably try to just get in one more quote from State and Revolution here and give you my thoughts on it and invite you to share your thoughts. So here's Lenin. Oh, hey, excellent. So good to see you. I wasn't sure who it was, but I'm very happy. I'm very happy to have you join us. I hope you'll be able to do it again in the future. And of course, if you have any thoughts on how to improve what I'm doing, and they can be Minecraft related, or they can be, substantive to the discussion, please let me know. I'm trying to learn. Or if you think I'm wrong about something or I've done something stupid, let me know. I do that quite frequently. So here's Lenin again. We're still in, I think, the first section of State and Revolution. So he writes, I assume this is him. I'm bad at taking notes. It doesn't look like my style. I think this is him. He writes, by educating the Workers' Party, Marxism educates the vanguard of the proletariat, capable of assuming power and leading the whole people to socialism. of directing and organizing the new system, of being the teacher, the guide, the leader of all the working and exploited people in organizing their social life without the bourgeoisie and against the bourgeoisie. By contrast, the opportunism now prevailing trains the members of the of the Workers' Party to be the representatives of the better paid workers, who lose touch with the masses, get along, quote, fairly well under capitalism, and sell their birthright for a massive pottage. That is, renounce their role as revolutionary leaders of the people against the bourgeoisie. And so this, again, the reason I was pulling out certain quotes is because this sounds like a very apt description of contemporary trends in democratic socialism. Right? Like, is it wild of me to read this and immediately think of those same groups that I was just naming, right? Like, is not Bernie Sanders and his supporters, as well intentioned as they may be? And I'll remind you again, I was, I once counted myself among them. This is self criticism as much as external criticism. Is it not fair to describe them as, members of the proletariat who have sort of taken on some of the views of the bourgeoisie? Remember, there's a difference in my understanding of Marxism between the views or the desires or the even the political programs of a certain class and the interests of that class. And Marxism is, makes its claims to being a science in the realm of politics and revolution depends in part, perhaps in large part, on the ability of an observer, right, a theorist, and it can be a worker. It doesn't have to be I don't mean like a college professor or whatever. Really, often the opposite. But the ability of someone in a scientific mode to determine the relative positions and antagonisms among interests in a society. Not to simply do what you see political scientists primarily do nowadays, which is poll people's opinions. Your opinion may not be an expression of your interests. Or alternatively, right, that is one problem. Alternatively, your interests as a member of a imperial power, the proletariat, the working class of an imperial power like the United States, or like Britain at the time that Marx was writing, or the time Lenin was writing still, or other European powers, obviously France, Germany. You may have opposing interests to the working people and exploited people, which Lenin keeps adding. That there are non-proletariat exploited people in the world, right? Rural agrarian farmers in colonies are not part of the proletariat, but they are nevertheless oppressed and exploited under capitalism or under the whatever social system is holding sway there that imperialism has kind of grafted itself onto and exploited in the Marxist sense. And so you have the possibility then, just to summarize that wandering point, of or a conflict between interests of a class and the desires or preferences or opinions of a class or members of a class, as well as the potential conflict between the interest of the imperial proletariat with the oppressed nation proletariat. And in that second case, upon closer inspection, what you actually still find is that conflict of interest is going to arise when the oppressor nation proletariat has interest aligned with the oppressor nation bourgeoisie. And this is the crux of social chauvinism in one of its forms, right? If you could say, and we'll get to, hopefully if we do more Lenin reading together, we'll get to Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where you see he piles up quote after quote from both imperialists and from so-called liberals or so-called social democrats and liberals, where they're basically saying, look, the best thing about imperialism is that you can bribe workers in the mother country with the riches that you've stolen from around the world. And this is obviously the frame in which I think of proposals like Medicare for All when they are touted as the be all end all of a political program and are divorced, separated from a critique of the domination of finance capital and the domination of the military industrial complex in the United States. Right? That's social chauvinism. How do I know that? Because I read Lenin and my eyes and ears work. I read Lenin and I looked around and saw that the stuff he was talking about is going on right now. So the problems that you see here then are getting along between the bourgeoisie of the of a Western industrialized nation and the proletariat of that nation. I look at Bernie Sanders' movement and it seems to represent this, but I obviously look at the phenomenon of labor aristocracy, which is to say the alignment of the upper stratum, the leadership of labor unions, with the ruling class. And you see an example of this oil and water mixing, right? We don't want bourgeoisie and proletariat interests to get muddled up together, and yet that's exactly what many labor unions seem to be best at doing. And like I said, the DSA represents this, and I think other criticisms apply to liberalism itself, right? We're really talking about opportunist and reformist strands within so-called Marxism here, if that makes sense. It is, to call it a form of liberalism is not a stretch. I'm just saying liberalism, simplicator, right? Liberalism in and of itself has very different problems that are actually, I think, much, much easier to critique. And so maybe that's a good place to wrap up. I'll turn it over to the chat while I just kind of mosey around. If you guys have any questions or comments or anything, I'd love to hear them. It's so great having people, spend a little bit of time with me. Maybe you got this on in the background while you're doing some chores or whatever. That's cool with me. Maybe you came for a couple of minutes and you left. I do this every night at 7 p.m. and then I upload the videos to YouTube, so you're welcome to hang out anytime. If you don't hang out, I'll just still do it anyways. I don't care. I mean, I do care. I very much care. Trust me, I do care that you're here, but it won't stop me if you're not, and I understand that you guys won't always be able to make it. But if you see me on Twitter and there's something in particular you want me to talk about, then please just let me know. If you have plans, I have some plans for this Minecraft world. I have some ideas in mind. If you have plans for any of this, let me know. I'll make some more progress and maybe do a bit more of an exciting Minecraft-centric stream at some point. But I look forward to talking with you guys again. I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. And I will see you, comrades, next time. Take care.